The big question: how quickly can brands and businesses change and modernize in response to the changing demographics globally? The future of work, demand for modernizing the practice of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and industry corrections. This is why we started the Change Podcast by Reframe, to help people leaders like you get answers that accelerate inclusive change and growth that reflects where the world is going. Get ready as we host a discussion with people leaders faced with the same challenges and modernize their approach to solving a decades-old problem. I'm your host, Jeffrey L. Bowman. Hi, this is Jeffrey Bowman, and welcome to the Season 1 wrap-up of the Change Podcast by Reframe. We are excited to have you here because over the last 6 weeks, we've been in both audio and video format sharing the conversations with leaders about the theme of Season 1. For those who may just be joining us, for Season 1, the theme was a bit of a revisionist history. It was really about the making of Reframe the marketplace, the total market approach to reaching the new majority. Over the last 6 weeks, we've had different guests, all types of industry backgrounds, as well as what they were bringing to the conversation. And in addition to Season 1 being the launch season, it's also done in celebration of our 10-year anniversary. The objective for the day is to really have a conversation with 4 out of the 6 guests that appeared on Season 1. And as you, being the listener, if you have questions, comments, or feedback, please feel free to email us or contact us at getreframe.com or jeffrey@getreframe.com. So let's kick off. For those who may or may not be familiar with the reality shows, this is somewhat of a season wrap-up. If you listen to the Season 1 intro, it really was about setting the context. And so when we talk about the wrap-up, the question becomes, did we accomplish what we set out to do? Did we give you our version of the meaning of our why, in terms of why I wrote Reframe the Marketplace, the total market approach to the new majority? Which was a form of documenting in terms of, what it is, what it's not, all the different elements that went into not only making a book, but validating their approach with actual customers. And so before we dive in and do somewhat of a reflection for each episode, I want to introduce everyone to Miriam Palma. Miriam joined us almost a year ago, or more than a year ago, when she came on board and said, hey, I want to produce and work with Reframe and produce this upcoming season. Miriam, if you could just give us a little background of who you are and what on earth got into you and wanted to work with me for over a year.
Thank you so much. It's been such a wonderful experience, the pleasure, and I've learned so much throughout this process. My background is as a journalist. I worked both in TV news back in my home country, Italy. And when I moved to the United States, I worked for a press agency. So I would report news from the United States to Italian news outlets and other institutions and companies. Then I took a pause, raised children, and then decided to come back exploring communication instead of journalism, pivoting my career. So I felt like Reframe was a very good fit for me because I embraced the mission of changing, making advertising and the marketing industry a more inclusive environment. So that was really the main reason why I decided to partner with you, Jeffrey, and I came to you and I was like, I want to learn more about your mission, about what you do, and I want to help get your that message out. I got to meet so many interesting people and hear the story behind what you've been doing and the structural issues within the advertising industry, which I was not aware of. And then I got into post-production too. I had a background with my TV uh, experience in the past, and I go back to it. So I put those skills to work with a different format, with a podcast, of course.
We definitely enjoyed working with you, and hopefully you'll come back for season 2. Big announcement that we have at the end of this wrap up. And so, we have been working together now for several months, and, I kind of knew the story thread, obviously, given the book. But what was, we'll go around the panel here and like, what was like the one big aha when you think about the book in terms of the overall arc of the book, and then having those one-on-one conversations with folks over the past several weeks? What was like the big aha for the listeners out there that may just be joining or need to be convinced to sit down and listen or watch 6 episodes?
I have to say, Louis' episode was very clarifying for
Are
me.
you just saying that because Lewis is on?
Yeah, because
Come
I
on
want to
now.
be nice to Louis. No, it was really one of the most crucial, because it showed me how this whole process or approach could be applied and applied successfully.
Charlie was the most. I mean,
Charlie was also extremely elucidating, because it gave me the background of the difficulties that you had, and an understanding of why it was so hard to change things around. And not that I was surprised by it. It's always hard to change things, especially when it comes to inclusion. But it was very important that you underline that. But yeah, I think with Lewis, it was also crucial to see how this approach can be successful, and so tremendously successful. One of the lines that you used that really also clarified for me the need of what you're doing is when, we were talking about segmentation, and how segmentation is used in advertising, and how it is separate and unequal in terms of how funding is distributed across the various groups. And that's really, like, for me, it's the point that marks the need for change.
Miriam, you learned a lot there.
Yes, I did my homework.
I think it was my charming personality that made the episode so compelling.
You got a lot of a lot of downloads, which have been extremely reflective of what people took away from the episode. And before we dive too deep, this was episode 5. I want to back up and start. And Miriam, that was a great intro in terms of how we'll walk through this wrap up and give the audience a little bit of perspective in terms of, why we went in the order that we did. And so Marla Kaplowitz is not on this panel, but that was episode 1. And what was really important is for us to take that macro view. And for those who haven't had a chance to listen, and Lewis and I got into this in episode 5, but it really was about challenging the industry to change from the inside out. And it was somewhat of a reveal as we were going through it, but also in terms of the research. When you think about marketing communications, more than $500 billion are spent annually. And those dollars are divided in general market and multicultural. And for the most part, it hasn't really changed. And so when you think about the idea of general and multi, our belief is, there's an argument to be made all day, every day about the inequities as relates to race, ethnic, and identity. But the real argument we're trying to reach is that economic inclusion. How do you shift from an economic perspective so that you close those inequity gaps from an investment standpoint? We can talk all day, every day with regards to the demographic shift, but if the dollars are not equally impacted, then there's really no impact financially. And so episode 1 was really about opening up the history and the relationship that the 4As has with the ANA, which is Association of National Advertisers, to which more than 80% of corporate America brands belong to, Advertising Research Foundation. And it really talks about the partnership that they have in educating an entire industry. And so, it was really insightful to get the background from her as to, why things are the way that they are, and the optimism as relates to the industry shifting. And so for those who haven't listened to episode 1, really insightful to get that broad view. And that's the way we open up the book as well, and giving you the history as to how we got here from a marketing communication standpoint. In order to, challenge the industry, you got to have a thing that you are introducing from a solution standpoint. And that was in episode 2 with Charlie McKittrick. And episode 2 was really about, you know, betting on the future of the first cultural agency. I was having drinks with someone and she said to me, and it really struck me because if we start with the industry, you go back to the early beginnings of the introduction of the topic and the approach, which had not been validated at that particular time, a lot of tension. And what she said to me is that, the total market approach means all lives matter. And I was like, bone crushing. And, I think there's a lot of misinformation that has followed since the introduction, because if anyone that has worked with Reframe's version, which we pioneered it, you will see that there's a significant ask on our part. Like, you have to invest in all segments in terms of understanding who they are, their attitudes, wants, and beliefs. And there is the cultural piece, which, we define as cross and polycultural. And then it becomes a level of investment that you want to make across those different segments. Some brands choose to lead with the cross-cultural piece in terms of what is what is similar in terms of attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs. And then some brands choose to do both in terms of get to the nuance and make that investment. So it's not one or the other, but in the episode 2 with Charlie, it was really important to understand being at a general market agency and starting the first cultural agency with Ogilvy Culture as the barriers that we face internally, and then how we were able to navigate those barriers to introduce a practice that could help organizations do the same thing, and that is change. And so that's, if you want to hear the perspective in terms of if you are a leader, if you are struggling internally within your organization to change, to be more reflective of the new majority, then that's definitely a great episode for you. Now, we get to episode 3. Episode 3 is about documenting the story about the change required. And that is the J.L. Sturmer. And so, one of the things that I often say to folks in the biz is probably the greatest sin that was committed over the last 60 years was the undocumenting of the journey and of the story. And so when you think about multicultural agencies and even general market agencies, but not so much, but, multicultural practitioners in terms of writing the blueprint and then passing it on for the next generation. Same thing with the civil rights movement. Part of the opportunity we have in this moment is to write the next blueprint for the next generation. The question is, will we document? Will we introduce new concepts, frameworks, and challenge so that we do move things forward? And so, the big learning that I did have with being at Ogilvy, and one of the key things with David Ogilvy was that copy, document, white paper, frame the challenge, frame the solutions as it relates to how you solve for it so that the next generation or the next iterative phase is that much easier. Whether you agree or disagree with it, it is documented. And so with JL, why something else? Meaning the podcast. We've been working for like 10 years together, especially for aspiring authors. This episode thus far is far outpacing our other episodes on video. And mainly because if you listen to the episode and you're an aspiring writer, she gives you the tea. She gives you the nuggets in terms of the process, in terms of the journey we went on. We talk about the publisher and the editor. I mean, she really lays it out. So what did you take away from this episode that for others, if you are sitting in front of folks and they've never heard of this podcast, why listen to your episode?
I think, well, definitely for the information part of it in regards to just kind of the bare bones of what is required if anybody is thinking about writing a book. I think that because of the content, we dug a little bit deeper into what was more challenging. And just in terms of people, and I think I had mentioned this on the podcast, I wanted editors to read the proposal and be like, we need this. we need to utilize this. That isn't what happened, unfortunately. And I feel like we still need it. But I don't know, what was my favorite? What was the biggest takeaway? I mean, I think what you're talking about, the documentation is important, right? Because this was the first book, and it's been 10 years, and now there's a whole slew of books. Sometimes like when you're first, like it's good to be first, but then it's kind of like you're trying to get through, you have your machete and you're cutting through, like you're creating the path. I'm so happy that this book is more relevant than ever. It is something that I can see, its relevance in every facet of life. It feels all encompassing on that level to me. But yeah, I think the book industry is an interesting place, right? Like who gets to decide what you read, the gatekeepers, the hoops that you jump through, the way that you navigate, the way that you try to get what you want. We definitely dug deep in the episode in terms of like specificity in regards to even just like the cover of the book. So I think it's good. Yeah, I feel like it's a good kind of behind the scenes look at it, at what we did.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned and again the purpose for the episode, when you think about the making of the book, could not leave you out of the conversation, because the book would not have been made if we didn't have you and the relationship to build upon. And you touch on something about being the first or pioneering. Sometimes you got the machete. For episode 4, interviewing someone who is very, Patrick, you're like, you've interviewed, you produce, and I've found that sometimes you were interviewing me in the episode. And what was really telling in terms of your thinking about the episode, you asked me about how others have been rewarded as a result of the work that we've been doing. And what did that mean to me? And I thought, when you think about your episode in terms of your input, your thumbprint, in terms of the making of the roundtable, it's official. There is a new majority. Will live and ring in the ears for a lifetime, because, that's the stamp. And so can you share a little bit about what made you ask that question? Because there was something in the background of your ethos in terms of, I wonder how Jeffrey would respond to that.
Well, I think I was inside my own aha during our talk, reminded that those 10 years ago, when after you put it on the page, which is what we really got out of JL, explaining kind of the breakout of what it took to have that book be, and then that you would then be visionary enough to take it to the next level and take it upon yourself to produce an industry standard, an industry level roundtable that had all the makings of the genius of Gen Z, the genius of what the kids now do with an instant thought and put on TikTok. You sort of had the vision 10 years ago, before all of these ecosystems existed, to build something that could be seen. And I thought that for what our industry is, and what, as Black men, we can often be othered while belonging. I thought that was so pioneering that you would think to bring Soledad O'Brien on at a time in her career where she was shaping her presence in the industry, and have her discuss this new mindset. We know how good audiobooks are doing these days, because not everybody is reading. And so you had the vision to really sort of create something that was 3-dimensional, that really broke down diversely with industry leaders what this mission is all about. And I was spellbound by the time you unpacked for me why you hired me. We've never had any of those discussions. And so for us to really kind of be on that revisionist road of what inspired you to build that great roundtable that I helped you build, I personally was spellbound. And so that's where that question came from.
No, it was very appropriate in terms of putting a stamp. And the other thing that I'll add before we move on to Lewis is that, you've got 4 HBCU graduates on this line, right? Quentin, Morehouse man; Patrick, Morehouse senior man; myself, Clark Atlanta grad in the AUC but South Carolina State; and Austin Bowman, Spelman. And so I say that because sometimes the stories, what role did your background play or plays in terms of how you tell stories, given your history and the origins coming from an HBCU campus? And this is a plug for HBCUs before we move on to Lewis.
For me, it's amplifying African American excellence in all that I do and all the spaces and places I've been. I've had a career for 30 plus years where I've happened to be in rooms where Black excellence was being celebrated on a high level. I'm the sole producer that Oprah Winfrey brought on to interview all of her legends and youngins for her historic Legends Ball in 2005. I was one of the core crew that helped bring her Girls Academy to life in South Africa. Black excellence is just what Morehouse has inspired me to do and be about in my career and life. And I do it unapologetically because it is inclusive of the American narrative. It is not separate or othered. It is a part. And it's up to us in many instances to do that amplifying.
Love it. And the last thing I'll say before we move on to Lewis is congratulations on your new president, Dr. Bowman. So that was announced today. So just had to give a little credit there. But no, thank you, Patrick. You've been an amazing leader in terms of pushing us forward with the roundtable and taking, I don't know if the audience knows how hard it is to take something that's been published and then transfer to video in a roundtable setting. And I think we were able to definitely translate that well, and all because of the work that you've been able to do.
Class of 90,
So thank you.
Dr. Bowman, class of 92. I thought I'd put that out.
Love it. Love it. So Lewis.
Jeffrey.
I was not sure, but sure, if we could tell the whole story, and I relay the title back to episode 5 to an important time frame within the civil rights era. There's a famous gentleman out of Atlanta that talks about good trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you are an ally on multiple ways. I think you were walking into something after the engagement when I invited you to Chicago to go down to Foxhole. And I think it's an historical moment that hopefully one day is documented, because I think with the work that you were able to help guide at MetLife as well as help guide at Ogilvy, really is ground zero in terms of, you think about the arc of the making of the book. The book wasn't published until 2015, but the journey began in 2009, 2010, and then you and I engaged. I think it was right around 2011, and then once we got far enough to see the strategic impact in 2013, you went along with us to advocate for what it is and what it wasn't. And it wasn't until 2015, after a couple more engagements, that we really had a viable framework, a viable product to which we could then go out and execute 50 more customer engagements. So I wanted to share that arc, because I think what sometimes gets misinformed and misconstrued is that when the topic was originally introduced, there was no really there. It was a topic. And then we went into experimenting, asking folks like Lewis at brands, it's like, hey, give us a shot at Ogilvy Culture. And then it wasn't until 2 or 3 years later that we actually could say, this thing works. And so, Lewis, when you look back, now 10 years, actually more on your part, and we touched on this in the episode, and for those who haven't listened, Good Trouble Validating a Total Market Approach. What would you say were your defining moments to keep going on the journey?
Well, thank you. That was a very comprehensive question, Jeffrey. And I just want to say, I don't know if you can compare what we did to, what John Lewis did, especially on the, the Pettus Bridge. And I mean, that's a whole different level than what we were trying to accomplish. What I think resonated with me was this idea of, if we can find something that's a connector across different groups and find a way to message that to connect with those groups, that to me is what the total market is kind of all about. It's not about, tokenism and casting. which is what it had been in the advertising industry for probably 30 years. It's really about finding the insights from the data, Jeffrey. And that was the thing. It was data driven, but finding insights from the data that there was a connectivity, which I talked about a little bit during the podcast. For example, the importance of, a maternal figure in the family with respect to taking care of the family and how that linked naturally to life insurance. And that was something that culturally resonated with various groups from East Asia and South Asia, in addition to other groups that we were looking at, including people from Spanish-speaking countries from South America. You mentioned earlier, Jeffrey, that someone, and I didn't catch who it was, used the term "all markets matter." Was that actually
All lives,
person?
all lives matter.
All lives matter. Oh, that's even worse. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's terrible, because I would hate for what we did on the total market and what I think the vision, the Reframe has for the total market, to be warped into this, kind of, this is why we don't need DEI. This is why all of the kind of things that are coming out of the current administration is transforming history to say, okay, we just basically have to treat everybody exactly equal, and it's a meritocracy. Of course, it's meritocracy for this administration only to the extent of, if these guys are really good on Fox News, then I'll hire them. So sorry to throw in some
The
politics.
views that are being expressed by this panel does not reflect.
Absolutely. My point is, the total market doesn't mean you don't acknowledge, embrace, and quite frankly, leverage the differences that we have, being from different backgrounds and different ethnic groups, because that is part of the strength, I think, of the country. It's the strength of companies that have focused on DEI initiatives. I think we're trying to create different viewpoints and bring different viewpoints into the room for better business outcomes. And the data supports that. In the case of the total market, it was connecting with a broader population that had been connected with in the past in the narrow world that I was working in, which was life insurance. There was basically several different groups over-indexed in terms of interest in life insurance and under-indexed in terms of market penetration. So that was clearly a market opportunity that the total market could help address. So I don't think I answered your question, Jeffrey, because I went in a little.
You did.
Direction.
You did.
But
Yeah.
But that was the point that I make, and I couldn't let the "all lives matter" comment pass without some
Absolutely.
to that, because that really bothered me.
Yeah, no, look, as we look, in terms of the future of the marketplace, and, hence the reason we set up at the ending of the season around Gen Z perspective, as I reflect and think about the making of the book and the topic and the approach, 10 years later, here's a spoiler alert. The reality is that the budgets really haven't changed. And, with the work that we've been able to do, there's been resistance from both general market and multicultural. And what you see is a retrenchment back to traditional general market and multicultural from a financial and investment standpoint. And so, I think the numbers that we got from the Association of National Advertisers, the latest was 2023, 24 spend investments hadn't changed. And so what I'm hopeful for is that, the foundation that we laid gives the next generation in terms of something to build off of, number one. And number two, I think the thing that oftentimes gets misconstrued in the approach and in the process, which you hear a lot about, is culture. And so what the approach does force companies to do is unpack and get primary data as it relates to the different groups, but also from a cultural standpoint, which you mentioned as it relates to family. So, more work to be done for sure, not just about the innovative approach, but also in terms of how do you really get companies to invest in those key audiences. And you've seen through the process that it does require a heavier lift because you're expanding the audience preview as a whole. So want to thank you, Louis, for being a partner, sharing the impact in terms of results, because oftentimes that's kind of hard to do, but we're years away from the work. So you were able to share the impact and the results. And so as we move to the future, Austin Bowman, Gen Z and your perspective. The original intent of that episode was for someone who was right there with me, for 10 years. The intent was to get your point of view in terms of the approach and the operations and how it may or may not have changed. But I thought the conversation went more in terms of, and I love your quote, your phrase, and how agencies need to have more imagination. What sparked that? Because one would have thought, like, you're a direct lineage, and we're still talking about folks having access into the industry. Why is that still an opportunity?
That's so nice of you to say, opportunity. I think that there's a lot to it. I don't have a traditional background in advertising, and I'm a Nepo baby. And I think those two things were really confusing for people to understand when I was applying to jobs. They were like, whoa. But even the fact that I didn't have a traditional advertising background, but I had made a 15-minute documentary by myself in the middle of the pandemic and also have a film degree. And people were like, I don't know. Can you be a PA? I just don't know. That is what caused that theory that I spoke to on the podcast to talk about, because how I literally studied film in college for 4 years, and people are like, I don't know if you can make a 30-second commercial. I've made plenty of them by now, because that's just what you have to do in film school and in any type of communication school. I also think, going back to your question about HBCUs in general, when I went to Spelman, I saw so much creativity. And my first year being a PA, I used to be like, oh my God, my college friends have more creativity in their pinky finger than we have at this whole agency. And I would say that jokingly, but then once I started really thinking about the truth to that joke, I was like, okay. There's such a narrow view on what is considered trained and creative and someone who can be a marketer, but that same thinking is limiting the industry from changing and accepting people that have alternative ways of creating and bringing them into our industry. And I think someone coming from both sides of it, right? I come from advertising more on the familial side, and I come from creative making media from the more trained side. I think it was just interesting for me. I think I was just the perfect person to make that observation.
And for a positive note, for folks who are looking to come into the biz, a lot going on right now with consolidation. What is the thing or point of view you can share with folks who are making these decisions as to whether or not to keep or bring on emerging talent? What would you say to them? Because it's a lot. It's about to happen in the industry over the next 2 quarters.
I think similar to your mission, I have the same mission, story. Everyone has a story. Everyone has important things that they want to share. Everyone has stories that they want to tell, and those stories transcend race and gender and different types of self-expression, because those stories at the end of the day are all rooted in themes that we can all relate to. So I think as long as people have that in the back of their mind when they're doing hiring or when they're applying, I think that'll take them far. The stories I have to tell, people across the world can relate to, because they're stories of human themes, and we're all human. So I just think people need to remember that our experiences inform our creative decisions and our creative makers. And so those experiences are 360. They're not experiences you just have because you're in advertising school, or experiences you just have because you went to film school. If anything, advertising is the perfect place to incubate those people, because we already have so many structures built up of telling stories.
Wow, isn't that special? I'm excited for what we've been able to package over the course of, the 6 episodes. And, I think for me and the audience and relationship that we're trying to build, it is about truth telling, but also offering a solution. And to help, what I like to say, Reframe helps leaders solve a decades old problem. And so as we wrap it up, big announcement, season 2 is coming in the winter of 2025. Title or the theme for season 2 is the future of inclusion. And so when you have a lot of things happening about the past and present, who's thinking about the future? And so Quentin Anderson, who joined us as a brand partnership, will be in touch with you and audience members and brand partners to talk about our inclusive leadership series, along with our season 2 promo for sponsorship opportunities as well. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself, Jeffrey at getreframe.com, or Quentin at getreframe.com. Thank you all again. Cheers to everyone, even though this is a Coke and Pepsi. We're not biased, for joining us, and really appreciate the time that you share.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Job well done, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.